Happy Magic Mondays. For those who know me, that's something which I typically start my week with. It pissed my teams off when we started working together, but eventually they got used to. That's just a little bit of me. But to tell you a little secret, this Monday just didn't happen that magical. Almost didn't happen magical. We had a gruesome weekend trying to get something off the line. Why, you may ask? So here I am working with a bunch of talented people, very young leaders who were working with me to get something off the line, a bunch of collaterals for a customer. And every time they came back to me with a version, it was not approved. It was quote unquote in their own language, AI Slob. And every time they got a feedback, they very diligently went back, tried to fix it in AI, and it came back worse. So eventually we were on Friday evening sitting with tons of iterations, but nothing which met our standards. So what did we do? We shut off all the tools. We actually got in a bunch of papers, sat together, made a schema on paper, and then went back to AI when we were sure of what we wanted and tackled one section, I repeat, at a time. It was not a broad brush. It was not a one size that fits all. But with every element of those documents, tackled it one by one. It took longer than what a typical AI prompt would be, but at the end of it, at the end of this weekend, we were ready to ship out something that we loved, we stood behind, and I'm sure my customer appreciates that output as well. While I barely managed to make the Magic Monday happen again, and here we are, but it just got me thinking that while I was best with a team that was ready to take my feedback, was not scared to go back to old ways of working and thinking, ready to write down things on paper. What about other kind of AI investment that happened? Is this something that every AI manager is facing, where AI was brought in to solve a lot of problems? What happens when teams are not able to live with the output that AI has created for them, but have nowhere to go back? These are some of the questions that don't just trouble me as a marketer, but more as a business person. As to layoffs, yes, that's one impact of AI, but what happens to the rest of us who continue to work in an environment that is so AI aligned now? To address some of these questions, I have an old friend who I'd like to welcome back to open letter of the CMO, Kelly. As you might know, she's somebody who totally believes that relationships and retention are a secret to customer growth. And what does this mean in AI real world? These are some of the conversations that we have planned to have today. Welcome, Kelly, and happy Magic Monday.
And I think you're right. I think the conversation around AI is it's sort of lacking I don't know, a core component, which is how do we help people navigate change? Change is something that I think for as long as anyone's owned a business or, been in the workforce, the only thing, what do they say? The only thing constant is change. But I think, from my seat as a fractional, and I'm a fractional post sales leader. So I'm working with clients on growing the existing customer base, retaining that existing customer base, creating and building systems and processes to help the people on the team manage that easier. And I think I sort of have this unique perspective because I'm working with clients that are, I have a tech client, I have an agency client, I have a professional services client. And so I'm seeing it across different industries. And I feel like the human reactions are surprisingly consistent to this. There's really no organization that I've seen that's completely replacing people with AI. I think it's more about, for me, I've always tried to frame it with like taking the work that we don't love the most, the work that we hate the most, the repetitive work, and allowing the talented humans to spend more time thinking and solving problems and really connecting with customers. And it's such an awesome, for me, the biggest opportunity in AI is giving people their time back so that they can do that. And thinking about my seat in post sales, that's huge. That's a super huge thing. So I love having this conversation about really change and change management around AI.
Right. So Kelly, you mentioned a very interesting thing when we were just talking.
Sure.
You've been across so many industries, tech, professional services, and you also talked about consistency in feeling the impact. But do you see any kind of difference when this is the industry in the way they evaluate respect to AI, especially when it comes to people? So, do these industries, so does a tech company evaluate AI risk differently
Hmm.
than say, a professional services company, especially when it comes to people? Data, I can understand. I don't think that is, I mean, that's a no brainer kind of, that
Sure.
yes, data becomes more riskier and there are boundaries around it when it comes to AI. So, do tech companies or professional services companies or any other industries react differently with respect to AI? Bases their
I,
people strategy and training and
yeah, yeah, exactly. I do think that there's differences. I think maybe as a default, a SaaS tech company can at least can think that they treat their post sales relationships very differently than an agency or professional services. I think that an agency or a professional services firm would would automatically answer, we have great customer relationships or client relationships. We're so engaged and the humans are really driving that, and so I think an agency or a professional services firm might have more reservations about quote unquote outsourcing something to AI when it comes to customer relationships. And I think so many people who work in post sales for an agency or professional services firm, they're on the account side, right? Most of them would say, I didn't get into this profession because I like writing follow-up emails or documenting notes in the CRM. I got into it because I like to help my clients solve problems. I like to build relationships with my clients. And that's where I think AI becomes almost even more powerful than within a tech company because it's a firm like that who's been relying on people to do a lot of that work for a very long time. And the way that I see it is if we can take 2 hours from each client onboarding. We can take 2 hours off of an account manager's plate for a client onboarding and better automate that. That's 2 more hours that an account manager can spend thinking about the future opportunities for that client or building relationship with that client live versus having to process all of the sales discovery information with their own brain, right? And I think that then allows more time for those strategic conversations, those executive business reviews. What is one of the things we have to do in post sales is multi-threading relationships across the organization. We want to get to know as many different folks at our client's organization as possible for expansion opportunities, for risk mitigation with the retention, right? We don't want our main POC to walk out the door tomorrow and there goes our business. So I think I think risk is looked at differently with AI. I think we're not using AI to replace like thoughtful engagement. We're using it to support more of that. That's how I look at it. Like if I'm giving a human team more hours in the day or a different perspective to consider, AI can look at things to me in a much less emotional way quite often. Whereas a human, I am ingrained with this particular client or I have a lot of background on this client. Emotion might be clouding my judgment as a human. And so being able to have, as a human, being able to have a thought partner who can actually talk to me about what might be going on in that account is actually something really valuable. Looking at customer health through the lens of AI, it doesn't replace your thinking. It's actually looking at it from a different perspective and it might pick up on signals that you haven't seen as a human because your judgment is so clouded or you've had a really frustrating time working with XYZ customer and you don't know heads or tails right now. but AI can sort of look at it and go, have you considered this, Kelly? And maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But I really do think it's giving the humans in post sales a much different perspective.
Very interesting. And Kelly, if I were to just draw an example for something like this, something more practical, would you be able to help us understand in a more practical manner as to, say, in a post-sale environment, what would, say, an AI deployment look like, and where could the impacts really be visible?
Sure. One of the things that a very simple example is a CRM workflow automation using AI. So taking whatever note taker you're using at the company and automating a workflow connection so that that note taker is taking the link to the conversation, the notes, the action items, and the summary, and dropping it right into that CRM record. So no matter who is talking to somebody at that customer across the company, you'll see that. So the client success manager or customer success manager is one person at an organization. That person might technically own that account, right? But an executive might be speaking to the client. A salesperson might be speaking to the client. A finance person might be speaking to the client, all about different things, right? And being able to sync emails and then summaries of conversations from your AI note taker is huge because then you can look at it from one central source of truth, your CRM, and see all of the different folks around the organization that might be touching the client so that you have the full picture of what's going on just looking at your CRM. That's one really easy workflow optimization that I've used with several of my clients, and it doesn't take much time to set up at all. How's that example?
That's a beautiful example. And I think
Super simple. Like, and a lot of people might say, like, that's a G duh example. Like, of course you're doing that, right? But I mean,
I think we can continue.
I've talked to several organizations that have said, wow, like that does save a lot of time. So it's really huge.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised as to some of the simple solutions that actually get ignored or because they're too simple. And sometimes the secret to making the difference lies in these simple things.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other piece of that too is the example of onboarding a new client, like I mentioned. There could be hours and hours worth of sales discovery information that needs to get synthesized for an onboarding call with a customer. And rather than have the customer success manager slog through that, wouldn't it be nice to get a draft right in your inbox of your onboarding session highlighted with AI highlights saying, hey, customer success manager, dig further into these three topics before your onboarding call. Ask these questions of the customer during your onboarding call. These might be things to clarify. These are some opportunities. So it's like having somebody kind of sitting on your shoulder, looking over and going like, I think I see something interesting there.
Yeah.
Or make a note for 6 months down the road to ask this customer about this other product that we sell. So their entry point might be product A, but I wonder if they're a nicely aligned candidate for product B if they found success, early on in the relationship. So just being able to think in terms of efficiencies. And I think a lot of customer success folks think, well, I have to carry the responsibility for really learning my customer inside out from the first hour. And yes, it's your responsibility to really know your customer, but isn't it nice and isn't it efficient that something else is helping you learn it more quickly and identifying some of the ways that you can provide value more quickly to your customer?
I do agree. And it's a very beautiful example of not just automation, but also of a collaborate rather than replace strategy.
There you go.
Customer success, especially, has acquired a very notorious name and reputation where AI will replace humans. It's not just created a media frenzy, but I think the fear is very real with the people who are actually working in this profession, the entry level people and the middle management who are doing it day and day, and they fear that they're actually training the technology to replace them. But In my mind, and I've been working with a couple of hybrid CSX companies, I don't see the need for replacement. In
Mm-mm.
fact, replacement takes away a lot of engagement, the human to human interaction, maybe the longevity of a customer over the life cycle. But when it comes to using a hybrid kind of a, maybe with an example like you stated, when you let CRM do the heavy lifting of reporting and analyzing and documenting and leaving it enough human time for interaction and thought and research, I think that really adds to the customer value. So it's a beautiful collaborate example and then a
Yeah.
shift from the replace examples we see.
I think it's not even like the customer value. It's like employee satisfaction too. I've talked a lot about the tie between customer and employee satisfaction and how intertwined those are. As a customer success leader, like my team being happy is critical, right? And so if I can take away some of the things that are time consuming and repetitive in their job and free them up to actually have strategic growth conversations with customers, that is just a huge shift in their whole outlook and their point of view on their job. And so now what have we done? Well, we're using AI as a tool to help in employee satisfaction and retention. So that is going to have a huge effect on how your customers perceive you as well. So I think it's just one of those things that really it's sort of intertwined in so many aspects of it. I hired a full-time customer success manager for one of my clients about a year and a half ago. A number of things that I've implemented there have really helped her to hone in on her own zone of genius. So she's enjoying the things that she's doing on a daily basis because it's like she has an assistant sitting next to her who's doing the stuff that hasn't always been her favorite. And that's been something that's been really impactful for that particular client.
I love the employee satisfaction angle you bring. In fact, it
Yeah.
reminds me of very early days in my career. I started off with a company called ACL, and
Okay.
their CEO had a philosophy. In fact, he's written a few books about it. It's called Employee First, Customer Second. Very bold, especially if you were to consider early 2000s, a tech services company and a company with the reputation of being sales first. Their CEO goes and makes this as a declaration that that's our philosophy and that's what we stand for.
Yeah.
Employees first and customers second. But having grown up in that organization, in fact, having started off my career at that, I
Sure.
can stand by it. It was not that we were pampered or our seniors did not get upset with us when we made mistakes. But I think the employee first strategy came to us with a level of empowerment that we held the relationship with the customer, with our suppliers, with our peers. We had not just the responsibility, but also somewhere the accountability towards all these stakeholders. I think
Yeah.
that's what made us so internally powerful. And this is me at my early 20s, really my first professional stint, feeling so empowered. And that's something that has, I think, lived with me throughout my career. So I think employee satisfaction and maybe AI helping that young individual feel that powerful again, where he or she has the information and the support to make a decision, not waiting for the supervisor or the manager to walk in and take the decision. I think that's something which is so powerful that AI can bring in.
I love that you had that experience so early in your career because I feel like so often when you're in a customer facing role, what do you hear over and over? Like just do whatever they want. Just the customer's right. Like do whatever you have to do to retain the customer. That's not always the case, right? There is a level of mutual accountability involved. You might be delivering a product or service, but the customer also, has to keep up their end of the agreement as well, whatever that looks like. And I think that's such a powerful experience to have in your career. And It's not about someone being right or wrong. It's about solving problems together and making sure that we're creating value for both the customer and whatever organization it is. So I think that that's a really critical learning.
Absolutely. So that okay, let's maybe flip the side of the conversation. And maybe let's ask a very dangerous question. In an environment like this, what do you think happens if the wrong kind of AI tools are introduced, or difficult and i- difficult to understand AI-driven processes are brought in? How does that
Yeah.
impact a relationship-driven function like customer success?
Yeah. I think I think we need to think about where the AI is primarily being used. Is it is it helping us to streamline some of our customer communications? Is it helping us see customer health signals internally? Is it powering an internal dashboard, for example? Or is it actually sending an end customer a communication? And I think that if we think about it in layers, it's a helpful way to manage the change involved as well with our teams. And so I think being able to say, you know, here's an efficiency initiative that's going to allow us to do these things internally and more strategically use our time. I think that keeps the employee or the team member involved in the decisions. And so I think that leadership needs to think about things like explaining the why behind something. So, we're evaluating a tool for this reason. It's not just about time saving or cost saving, it's about helping us up level our thinking, or I'm just using examples, or making it a little bit easier, streamlined to have a regular cadence with our customers. But I also think that there needs to be some level of agreement internally that like experimentation is part of this.
Yeah,
And if we're running, I love to think about it as like running an experiment, right? So that we can look at the before and the after and go, did this help us to do something different? Did the team like it? Did we really kind of remove some of that low value work and then be able to spend time doing more of the high value work? So I think looking at like evaluating tools is one thing, but then kind of benchmarking the before and after is necessary so that, the onboarding example that I mentioned, the client that I worked with on that, like we're
mhm,
saving ourselves between 2 and 2.5 hours per client onboarding. Well, if we're onboarding an average of 6 clients a week, that's a significant chunk of time at the end of one
absolutely.
month, right? So, did that help? But then the question is, what did that customer success manager do with that extra 12 hours a week? Extra. So, however much we're looking at, then the question is, what did we do? Did we get something of quality out of that? And that might mean that we're looking at people's time a little bit more closely and saying, wow, well, that customer success manager ended up actually working on 3 expansions and 2 executive meetings with that saved time. And it may not be as correlating as that, in every example. But I think the key is understanding what is the purpose of evaluating this tool and potentially running this pilot. But then where did we start and where did we finish on the pilot? Was it worth it? And making sure that the humans that were part of it actually can weigh in on saying, like, I loved that or that was terrible. What were you going to say, Shruti? I know you wanted to
I
jump in.
I think what you're saying just makes so much sense. I think in our traditional way, when we report efficiencies via automation or via cost initiatives, and I say that because I've been a transformation leader as well. So most
Great.
cost efficiency projects will report headcount reduction, they will report cost savings, but it is extremely rare when things like what you mentioned get captured. The optimum utilization of time and effort of that particular individual into something more productive. And that something more productive could be, like you said, a strategic win. It could be mentoring of the team. It could be self-learning. Many of
Right.
these things are not quantifiable. In fact, even if that means that person got back time to take a break and maybe have another coffee chat with somebody in the other department and network, or just to go back and play pickleball, you never know the
Right.
indirect impact that has begins to start creating into the environment that person is working in. And those things in traditional transformation scorecards never get captured. The amount of times when we've heard back from the people who are driving transformation is that we are not able to show enough cost savings. It's just that people are saving time and we don't know what's happening with that time is because they're not trying to figure out what's happening with the time. And
I think
these
it's a hard balance
undocumented
because
benefits, I
yeah,
think
I mean, we
agri-value
all want like
and
the ROI piece of it or like the
yeah,
efficiency piece, but I don't it's a hard thing. It's a hard balance and I know both of us working on the go to market side of a business, like we're at the mercy of scorecards quite frequently, right? But no matter what everybody talks about related to AI, business is still fundamentally about people. And so I
exactly.
think that we really need to think about the emotional impact of some of this as well. It's a challenge, but I would encourage everybody to do some serious measurement, beforehand and not just on the time savings or the money savings, but it's like, what did this enable the team to do differently in
Right.
addition to? How is their state of mind and state of being? Because, like we talked about at the very beginning of our discussion, leaders leaders need to lead differently too throughout this AI transformation.
Yeah, I think
It
that's a
gives you it's leaders can't just think about it as like I'm implementing this technology because your team is all your team says is change, change, change. This is change. What is this? And I think it can't just be based on a couple of things. It needs to the leaders need to think about it as I'm actually giving you a tool to allow you to do different work that you probably will enjoy more. And that's a pretty different way of looking at it.
absolutely, absolutely. So, Kelly, we can keep talking about it, I think, till the sun comes down. But unfortunately, we're almost out of time. We're at that segue when now I'm in the box and you get to ask
Can
me.
I put you in the hot seat? I want to ask you a question because you talked about having led transformations and you're obviously also a fractional CMO. And so, you read the headlines and then you see what's actually happening. And as we talked about, like that's typically not aligned, right? The headlines say one thing and what you're seeing inside of an organization is another. So, what have you been seeing as you've walked into new clients lately? What does the emotional temperature around AI and change look like today compared to a year ago? Because I think things are changing so rapidly. So, what are you seeing?
I love the question, especially when you talk about the difference in the temperature with respect to time.
Right.
I think, and if you take a step back, not just 12 months ago, 2023 is when the frenzy began. People didn't know much about AI, but they wanted to. So my first project was analyzing about 100 plus AI tools when I realized that 100 is actually a small number with respect to what's happening in AI.
Right.
I think since then, so much has happened. The LLMs have become stronger. At that time, the biggest fear was how do we educate the boards about AI? And now I think the boards are a little too educated about AI, if that is even a reality, but yes, it is.
I can understand that. I get what you're saying. Like they might know we all might know too much, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. So I met somebody for coffee from a very reputed organization, and it was supposed to be just for a coffee. And invariably, the conversation ended up about being AI. And we laughed. We're like, can't we talk about anything else? We can't even talk about our children anymore because you're already all we're talking about is AI.
Right.
So that personalism aside, I think when it comes to a professional environment, one factor from a change in temperature is that Everybody wants AI to be implemented. Having said that, when the output becomes beyond a level of threshold in AI, and I don't know how to measure or say 30%, 40%, like put a
Sure.
number around it,
Sure.
but as a human being, I can feel it that when it goes beyond a certain level, it stops being effective. Like the example that I gave in the beginning of the conversation. I'm not against my team using AI. Eventually, we went back to AI. But every time they wrote a document using AI, it got more and more machine written in less human. And that's what kept pushing me away from the final output. It was not bad, and it's not that they didn't work hard,
Yeah.
but somewhere in their attempt, they had crossed the threshold. So
Yeah.
that's one thing which has happened is that because we are able to identify what's written by AI or what's created by AI or what's coded by AI, after a certain threshold, it stops being interesting. Second, which I see a lot with the teams, is the dependence on AI. The kids have never written anything on their own. And when I say writing, I don't mean like writing an essay. But if they're planning, as a marketer, I'll give marketing examples. If they're planning a campaign, or they're doing a social media calendar, or they're trying to read a dashboard, they have never done it manually. So even if it's a dashboard, the question goes, what does this mean? Or why is the CTR down? Or what is the trend in terms of followers over the past 3 months? They've not sat down and analyzed it.
Right.
They don't see the correlations with their own eyes yet. And they have to be reminded to do it constantly.
Yeah.
Not always very accepted beautifully, but they have to be. On the flip side, especially with the creative people, I see, let's take an example of somebody who's very used to working with the best videography tools. They choose not to work with AI at all. Um, AI could save them a lot of time because they're already very creative thinkers, but it's as if they're fasting themselves from AI. So you have a certain set of people who can't live with, and then there are a certain set of people who will not live with AI. So that is a big contrast I'm seeing from a 0 to 100 degree
Yeah.
difference. And that has been, I think, the most surprising element in this whole thing where I see these two antidotes to each other. I
Yeah.
don't know if I answered your question, but
No, I do think that I think the temperature has changed a lot related to that, but I think that what you're bringing up is a really interesting point that actually goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, which was around the employee perception and understanding of AI and how it affects their day-to-day job, and then how does that affect leadership. And quite often leadership may have more career experience, they've been in the workforce longer, right? And it's a really great point that, we need to teach the younger folks just coming out of college that this is not a replacement for thinking.
yeah, yeah,
You can't outsource every aspect of your job. That leadership might use it differently. I might use it differently with 26 years of career experience than somebody who's just coming out into the workforce, because I'm already aware of what I need to be looking for, right? And so there's a whole other aspect of change management potentially for our younger team members, with less experience versus our mid-career versus our, executive level folks as well. And so I do think that's another layer of thinking around AI that until we just talked today, I don't know that I've ever articulated that, but it's very different depending on where you are in your career, right?
absolutely. And I
There's a
think
lot of
we ignore the
fear,
mid
at
careers.
one end or the other. Yeah.
Yeah, we tend to ignore the challenges faced by the mid careers.
Yeah.
Not something I think any organization can afford to do it, but unfortunately, that continues to happen. They're just expected to adapt and change to whatever is happening, but they're facing a lot of challenges of their own.
That's crazy. Yeah. It's great to just be it's nice to have conversations like this
Yes,
to really think about, like, what do you need to take away from it for your own organization or your own role, and really be thoughtful about AI and understand that we're going through a period of extremely rapid change, and what was true a month ago might not be true in 2 months.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing that every day. And so it's like, what is our North Star? And that's going to shift a little bit. And we've all got to be okay
Absolutely.
with that.
Yeah. So with open letter of CMO, we don't plan to preach any kind of solution. That's not the idea. I don't think in this scenario, like in today's world, preaching is even practical. I think if somebody is preaching, you should just run away. The attempt is to just place these questions on the table. The answer, what looks perfect to me, may not look perfect to you.
Right. Right.
Your scenario may be different, and times may be different as well. So, with this exercise, you're trying to at least talk about the things that don't get talked about, the uncomfortable truth. And I think in today's conversation, we've talked not just about one, but multiple such aspects that get so easily ignored. And before we close, I just want to reassure all the managers who are facing with similar dilemma to mine. AI is not going to go away, it's here to stay. But do you have to struggle with the thought that maybe your investment is incorrect, maybe you're not going in the right direction, maybe your team is a little too less or a little too entwined? So the AI, you don't have to live with it. White space thinking, we've done a few change management workshops around AI. If you're struggling with this, something like this, just buzz me. And or if you're struggling with how to grow with your current customers, you can obviously reach out to Kelly. She's a total expert on that. And thank you so much for joining in, Kelly. It was so wonderful to talk to you.
Thanks for
I
having
know
me.
you've been with us before, and I can promise you it's not going to be the last time. We will keep coming back to you for more. But this was an amazing Magic Monday.
Thanks for having me on Magic Monday, Shruti. Have a wonderful week.
Yeah, thank you.